I think the fractional model is a lovely model alongside AI because there will be needing some sort of human input at different stages. Those stages will probably change over time, but the fractional model enables that agility to have human interaction when AI is being, immersed in businesses. I think providing you as a fractional executive or a specialist are staying on top of everything that's going on in your ecosystem and outside of that, then you're always going to find work. It's just that work will change over time as things develop. And that's the way that we see our business evolving. So you're attracting the right fractional support, but also clients that don't see you as a bit of a scammy, we're outsourcing to another country, but we're not telling you about. So I feel that there's a real opportunity there to have a brand that is trusted in both of those spaces, because yes, we want to attract clients, of course, we're a business, but we're not going to have clients if we can't attract fantastic support. So we are very much in the middle of trying to balance the way that we come across as a brand to do both of those things. But it is a challenge. How do I see the role of a broker? I see it in a very different way to what a lot of the brokerages are like out there. And actually, the term broker was, I think Charles was the first person to say that to me when we first met. And I thought, actually, it's a really interesting way of explaining it. And I think if it was our conversation or someone else's, but we were talking about estate agents, and it was a bit like, well, it's kind of the estate agent model of fractional work, which I kind of also get. My perception and understanding, and certainly of how we operate in business, is we are there as a support mechanism, not only just for the client, but also the fractional executive or specialist.
Welcome to the Fractional Frontier, where we explore the future of leadership in today's evolving business landscape. I'm Charles McLachlan, here with Lorraine Carter, and every week we dive deep into the world of high-performing fractional executives and the businesses that leverage them.
And whether you're an experienced fractional leader or a business decision maker seeking top-tier talent, this is the place for actionable insights, strategies, and stories from the front lines of fractional leadership.
Today, we're delighted to welcome our guest, Chris West, who's going to share insights about operating a broker, bringing together fractional leaders and clients who can make the most of them. So, Chris, welcome. Can you tell us briefly about your career that led you into building a fractional leadership broker?
No, it's great to be here. Yeah, and of course. So I spent 9 years in corporate. I was fortunate enough to be in a graduate scheme that I worked through the ranks and had some quite senior leadership roles from there onwards. And we used a lot of sort of contracting and various sort of different businesses that supported that company. I can't say the name of the business, but it was a very large retailer that was Orange. And I got thinking that actually this is a really interesting model, that if enterprises and tier ones are leveraging that level of expertise, how can we bring that to smaller businesses, SMEs, startup scale-ups, and sort of the mid-market tier? So I ended up leaving that career and acquiring a fractional business, which is the one that we've currently got in the portfolio. For that reason predominantly, but also it was a good opportunity for having a business that I could use for other acquisitions, because it's a great model to leverage exceptional talent whenever you need it in a very cost-effective way.
That's really interesting, Chris. I'm even more interesting the fact that you're sharing that it is across large organizations as well as smaller ones, because typically often a lot of this is considered to be something that SMEs who can't hire really top-end talent full-time look to bring in that expertise, but in a way that's actually more resource efficient for them. So that's really interesting. So could you kind of, when you said you were looking at this in terms of bringing in this fractional role type model, why did you prefer that compared to, say, the traditional contractor or interim agency model, or even traditional recruitment model?
I think for a number of reasons, IR35 obviously was more of the interesting point. And I think ever since that was kind of introduced into the UK, it's never been really that well understood by organizations and businesses. And there's definitely this nervousness of going direct to someone that potentially is outside of IR35 as opposed to someone that's inside. So having a business as a brokerage that can kind of take care of that pain point for businesses, I found was quite interesting. Because even in the enterprise market, there was definitely a nervousness with that. It just didn't understand how they could bring that into their organization. And if they're feeling that way, absolutely the SME market is going to be feeling the same. So that was kind of an interesting point for me. And I think with the typical sort of temp agencies and recruiters and kind of all of that sphere of support of resourcing, this is a really, really good alternative model to those, where it is a lot more cost effective. You can get your hands on some incredibly talented and skilled individuals, and you don't really have the whole upfront cost model of a recruiter or an agency model. I think also it really frustrated me, having used those models previously in my own businesses, but also when I was in corporate. You don't have the kind of service that's high touch all the way through. So it's very much, we found you someone, here's our fee, thank you very much, goodbye. Or if it's a temporary model, it's, well, if it hasn't worked out, we go back to square one and we start all over again. I liked the idea of having a bit of an alternative that was a really high touch solution that, yes, found you exceptional people, but was there with you and the client all the way through that relationship to ensure that that continuity of service was there throughout.
That's a great clarifier. Actually, just reflecting on an expression you use, considering that our listeners are from all over, could you just clarify for those who may not be familiar what IR35 actually means?
Yeah, so with our model, we operate out. Oh, yes.
You're laughing, Charles.
Well, to summarize in 2 sentences, when for most people it's a complete quagmire of misinformation and confusion, I'll just say good luck, Chris.
I was just thinking the same. That was really putting me on the spot. So as a business as we are, we operate outside of IR35. So what that basically means is we cannot treat any of the fractional specialists that we work with as employees. So what that basically looks like is you can't have exclusivity with them where they just work with you and only you and the clients that we have. We can't dictate when they work, how they work, because it's got to be completely flexible. And every single type of contractual agreement or non-disclosure agreements or any type of agreement we bring in when we work with them has to specify all of those things. So they can work with multiple clients outside of us. They can work the hours of the clients that are working with us and them whenever they choose to through the week, providing obviously it works on both sides. And we have to be just very, very careful of they're not employees. With a contractor that sits within IR35, that's treated a little bit differently because they do have access, I believe, to some of the benefits of the pension schemes, holiday schemes, and those things that come with it. Outside of IR35, those fractional executives or fractional specialists don't, and that's for them to kind of be concerned with if they're set up as a sole trader or as a limited company, as most of them are. So it's definitely a sticking point. I think you hear some agencies that are outside of IR35 that absolutely are not behaving that way. And they do gag their specialists to exclusivity rights, and they do make sure they're only working with them and their clients. We don't do any of that. And it, you know, all it takes is for someone to notify HMRC and you're being crawled all over because you're not acting in as you should do outside of, you know, the rules and legislations that have been set. So that was my understanding of it, which I hope is right, because if I get it wrong, then I'm in hot water. But yeah, that's how we operate, and we're very clear with clients on that as well. Because as you can imagine, if you know one of our specialists is new to working with a client and the client hasn't done this before, they'll quite often go, yeah, but we need them on a Monday and Tuesday. So we're there to also say, well, actually, you can't do that, and this is why you can't. But what we can do is X, Y, and Z as a working relationship. So again, back to my point around being high touch. We also there to support the fractional specialists to make sure they're not being taken advantage of either.
That's a great
just give you a sense of what's at stake here. If you get IR35 wrong, it can cost you 40% of turnover before penalties. So, you know, this is but just for listeners who may not be familiar, how do you see the role of a broker?
How do I see the role of a broker? I see it in a very different way to what a lot of the brokerages are like out there. And actually, the term broker was, I think Charles was the first person to say that to me when we first met. And I thought, actually, it's a really interesting way of explaining it. And I think if it was our conversation or someone else's, but we were talking about estate agents, and it was a bit like, well, it's kind of the estate agent model of fractional work, which I kind of also get. My perception and understanding, and certainly of how we operate in business, is we are there as a support mechanism, not only just for the client, but also the fractional executive or specialist. So we're there bringing the two parties together, making sure we've got the right cultural fit for both, not just the client. And we're also providing a highly exceptional level of support for the client from the specialist that we're pairing them with. Beyond that point, we are then also there to make sure that all the client relations are taken care of by us, and the fractional executive or specialist feels supported all the way through. So they're not having to take control of client relations, or if any problems have arisen that, you know, typically they might have to look after outside of us, that sits on our shoulders. So we're very, very spread 50-50 between client and fractional side. I think a lot of brokerages are always client side. They're very not in tune with their pool of specialists that they might use. And sometimes that can obviously cause issue, because you're not going to get the quality of work if someone isn't feeling supported. We very much sit in the middle, and that's always been our mantra. Even when the business was formed 9 years ago by the founders that we acquired it from, they were always very much, we sit on both sides, and we've carried on that mantra all the way through.
That's quite compelling. So reflecting on that, what are some of the benefits for the fractional leader and your clients when you look at really staying focused on that sitting in the middle and a 50-50, as opposed to a bias either one way or the other?
There's three things I can think of. The first is it's a really lonely piece of work. You're working for yourself. You're a fractional executive or a specialist in a subject area. If you're working in that way, it can be quite lonely, because you're working with maybe 1, 2, or 3 clients, and you don't really have a support mechanism outside of that other than you. Working with us, you do. You've got a pool of people that are working across sort of 6 or 7 key functions that we provide to businesses. A lot of them share knowledge. They ask questions around some issues that they may have come across, for example, in the finance department, and they can liaise and meet each other and talk. And it's a really nice way of kind of just almost accidentally building quite a nice organic community. So that's number one, which is quite a nice benefit for them. Number two, most people hate business development. They've got to go out there, they've got to go and find more business. They know their contract is coming to an end in 3 months with a particular client they may be working with. They've got to go and find someone again. We take care of all of that. So we've got a deal flow. We've got leads coming into the business. We're going out finding leads. So we're there kind of bringing business to our fractional specialists' doorsteps. And then we ask for their sign off. So if they're happy to proceed with meeting that client, then we'll initiate that conversation. And if they turn around and say, actually, this doesn't seem a very good fit for us, then we won't push it in their direction. So they've always got that choice. And I think the third is having that level of protection. So as an organization, we have all the relevant insurances and protections, and we're registered with all the relevant governing bodies. We obviously take care of any problems that arise. So if there's a swap out required from the specialist support we're providing, or there's holiday, or there's some unexpected sickness that we need to take care of, or we need to communicate with the client, sits on our shoulders. So this is very much for a fractional specialist. You're focused on doing some fantastic work and obviously building a rapport with the client. Outside of that, it's all on the business's shoulders to take care of. And I think that's a really, really nice benefit for a fractional executive or specialist.
And
that's great.
I think that's a great balance and a great explainer, because you've touched on so many points as somebody who's worked in this capacity for so long, that I immediately can connect with. It almost sounds like you could even take what is perhaps organic at the moment in terms of that community, and maybe even intentionally develop it a bit more. So you are developing, you know, your pool of talent is developing relationships, and where you might have a situation where one of your client companies actually needs a team of 2 or 3 people going in, those relationships are already developed, as opposed to going in cold, because then people work even more effectively together.
Absolutely. And what's really nice to see is we have a number of clients that might plug into various different services. And then because we centralized our communications with the specialists that are being used on those clients, but also our account management, you've kind of almost built this fractional remote team, and they're all working together on different elements or cogs of that business. And it's really, really nice to see. And I know there's quite a few communities that are specifically in London, that I know a couple of companies that are bringing this together more from fractional executives, where it's kind of monetized on monthly subscription model. But I love that. I think it can be a really lonely piece of work. So bringing these communities together where you can learn, you can meet, and if you find some business from it, fantastic. I think it's a really good way. We haven't got there yet. I think I still want us to keep very much focused on providing work for fractional executives and specialists. But I dare say, to your point, Lorraine, there could be an opportunity longer term that we look at building a community in a different way.
It just, when you mention all the different things you have, it helps, I think, the stickiness factor of what you are building, because everything we do is all about relationships and the human connection. So if you're building deeper connection, and it's part of a bonus of being part of that, I think you've got then a really compelling model to retain that talent.
Yeah. And it's definitely a challenge for businesses like ours to retain talent. I think there's a few things with that, in the sense that quite often you hear of some stories where people just aren't being paid fairly. That's definitely common. And also the stories of they're just not supported. They've never had any interaction with the agency or the brokerage they're working for. They kind of get past the clients, and it's there's no brief, there's no context of who the client is, that there's no meeting before you go onto the work. So there's lots of intangible things that you can do to retain talent, and I believe we do a relatively good job of that. It's simple thing that we have as an example. We have a discovery call with our clients as a sales cycle, and then we do these meet and greet calls. So we set them up for half an hour. They can meet a number of the different specialists that we think are, number one, a good skill set fit, but also more importantly, a personality fit. And that gives the opportunity not just for the client to say, tick, they're great, but also for the fractional executive to say, yeah, we really like this client, we want to work with them. And that alone is a game changer.
I think it's really interesting to hear you start talking about some of the challenges. And I suppose, you are that bridge between the fractional and the client. But as they say, if you're a bridge, don't be surprised when you get walked all over. What were the biggest challenges you faced when seeking to take this to the next level?
I think really when the acquisition went through, we got very close to clients. That was the first port of call. So what are we not, as much as I want to hear the good things, I want to hear all of the bad. That's the most important thing for me. And it was, your service quality is inconsistent. And one of the things that obviously causes a large amount of inconsistency in this type of work is they're not full-time employees, so you don't feel like you've got an element of control in the same way as you would with a full-time headcount. And it was quite hard to manage quality control. But to be honest, the thing that really solved that, which I believe the business needed to optimize, was how we were sourcing and how long we were spending during that process of building a rapport with the fractional specialists that were coming on board. And the minute we kind of dialed down on that, it changed it significantly, because we're now attracting talent that actually are very, very good. They're completely independent. We have obviously certain processes in place of checking in on both sides to make sure everyone's happy. Just those small little tweaks made a really big difference into how we maintain that quality. But that will continue to be an ongoing issue for sure as you scale. But certainly was the number one problem that we found when the acquisition went through and we needed to kind of get our hands dirty.
Absolutely understand that. So that plays right back into the kinds of marketing insights that Lorraine would be challenging you with. I suppose from my point of view, I'm much more interested in the sort of developmental side of the fractional leader. How does working with you bring them value so that they continue to grow and develop and become more and more valuable to the marketplace and to the clients they serve?
It's a really interesting point, and it's something that we've been working on more going into this new year. So we now run, I started from sort of February, some sort of monthly upskilling courses or sessions with the external providers, based on some of the areas that we feel would be really useful for getting upskilling and some learning on. For example, we had a session in February that was all around adoption of kind of AI agents, how our specialists can utilize that in their work to make them more productive. They can get more done in the time that they're being paid for, and they're keeping up to trends with the latest technological advancements in AI and all the softwares and tools that are available. Because not everyone is aware that they've got, even the note-taking function that they could have on calls to remove that task for them. Not everyone is aware that they could build an agent that could also automate some of the more monotonous transactional tasks that they do on a day-to-day basis, which then will then enable them to leverage their time at more strategic, higher level elements for client work. So we're definitely focused a lot more on doing that. We don't believe that AI will eradicate any of these markets. I think the fractional model is a lovely model alongside AI because there will be needing some sort of human input at different stages. Those stages will probably change over time, but the fractional model enables that agility to have human interaction when AI is being, immersed in businesses. So I think providing you as a fractional executive or a specialist are staying on top of everything that's going on in your ecosystem and outside of that, then you're always going to find work. It's just that work will change over time as things develop. And that's the way that we see our business evolving.
Yeah, that's a really great point because often those of us who are working in fractional roles, it's a bit like the shoemaker and the shoes. You tend to neglect your own stuff occasionally because you're constantly prioritizing client. And as somebody who's worked a lot in knowledge transfer, you carving out that time for your own personal development is quite intentional. And I can say that, yeah, definitely over the years, I've invested a budget that could easily be between 9,000 to 10,000 euros because it's so important to stay on top of what's happening. And of course, things are even changing even faster now. A question that pops to mind, because I have two questions I have for you, but based on some of what you've shared, the first one I have is because I'm conscious that we have a broad spectrum of listers from multiple jurisdictions. The first question is how have you constructed your business model to ensure that you sustain growth? I know you've touched on that a bit more, but it'd be interesting to hear you expand on it a little bit. And the second question is, are you working with fractionals in multiple jurisdictions, or is your focus predominantly the UK in terms of, are you bringing in fractionals from overseas? Are you fulfilling client needs from overseas, or is it purely focused on fractionals and clients in the UK jurisdiction?
I guess the first question, I think this model, which is interesting and I love it, but also it can be quite challenging. It's evolving all of the time. And what's really interesting is you'll see trends appearing of specific services that are in more demand from a fractional perspective than others. And then all of a sudden, after a month or 2 or 6 months, that can switch entirely. And there's always this ongoing evolution of this service is now in demand. Okay, that's now kind of tailing off a little bit. Now we're over here. And that will always, I feel, be the case. There are obviously sort of 3 or 4 services that we provide out of the 7 that are typically more in demand. Will that be the case in a year's time? Probably not, and it will completely shift. We found that we've removed services over the last year, we've added services, we've optimized services, we've added additional fractional roles in some of these services, and it's all just because the client demands are changing so frequently. So that can be a challenge, but also it can be a really good thing because you've kind of got this option to expand revenue in other areas and move really quickly. Whereas some businesses that are very productized on one service and one area don't have the benefit to do that. So that's quite good for this model. In terms of jurisdictions, yes. So we've got actually 2 companies in the group. So the one that we talk a lot about at the moment is the UK talent-based business, but we do have clients globally. And we also have a business based in the US that is leveraging more of the global talent. So I don't love the term virtual assistants, but if I was to use a term, that's kind of what that business provides as an outsourced function, whereas the UK business is just UK-based talent. And I would say probably more sort of a higher level skill set quality. So it's interesting. I think the US absolutely have leveraged, as they would call it, the gig economy far quicker than the UK have. They are utilizing fractional support, freelancers, contractors, gig workers in every single element of business, whether it's enterprise and tier 1, mid-market, SMEs, scale-up startups, it's everywhere. And it seems like it's adopted far earlier than us. I think in the UK, whilst it's not a new term of sourcing or resourcing businesses, it still feels really educational. I think every sales call that we certainly go through, especially in even startup and scale up world, it's still quite convincing to sort of say, well, this is how it works and this is how you could use it. This is how it would work in your business in a better way. Whereas in the US, it's very much, well, yeah, we understand this, we've used it before. Great, can we get on with it? So that's been quite interesting to watch.
Yeah. And you know something that in, because I don't know if Charles mentioned to you, but I work outside of, so I am centrally based out of Ireland, but I work a lot overseas, but I also spend a lot of time in Scandinavia. And I have been just testing to see what the level of understanding is around fractional executive, and I've even used portfolio executive because they're pretty much interchangeable. And it's not something that within the testing that I've done, that it's very, very well understood or known at all. So I was reflecting that, yeah, there's an huge educational element here, because in the brand strategy context, there's a huge educational, because as soon as you say brand, people think logos, websites, and brochures before strategy. So that is a challenge. You've got a significant constant learning education factor within, so that people understand, actually, this is a brilliant service that I could need and I could actually avail of.
It's interesting that you look at the US, because I think what I've noticed over there is, one, it's a much more confused market. So you talked about gig, interim, fractional consulting. No, I don't think either participants, professionals, or their buyers really have clarity about the differentiation between those things. And the second thing is, I think many of the people I'm talking to, there's a major barrier to going into this kind of work style, because if you don't have corporate healthcare, it's really problematic. And so to become a freelancer without an anchor client who's going to provide you with health insurance actually feels really difficult. So I can see that that's something that perhaps, we don't have to face in the UK. But the other thing I think I was reflecting on is, you've talked about all of the services you provide to the fractionals and the high touch to the clients. When I've talked to other brokerages in the past, they've said the only way that we can continue to invest in growth is to take about 40% of the fee that the client pays us before we pass on the money to the professional. And have you got some kind of magic sauce, which means that actually the professional can get more of the cake than that?
Yeah, we do. I would say what we're very, very keen on doing is we look at market rates. So every time we have a discussion with someone we're sourcing and bringing on as one of the fractional specialists, we'll ask them, okay, where are you currently at from a day rate perspective? Now, we don't work on day rates because that can be considered as a contractor, so we have to be quite careful with that. But it gives us a bit of an idea of what people are earning. So we'll normally take that. We'll start to look at then, more conversations we're having and taking some averages. And we try to get close to sort of an hourly rate equivalent. We'll always be a little bit less in terms of what we pay as opposed to the open market, because there's a lot of intangible value working with us. For example, you're not having to do business development. You're not having to do all the contractual and client relations and all of the software costs that are associated with working with clients. So we trim a little bit off of that. But the cost that we pass on to clients is probably more expensive than most other brokerages. I'm not interested in having a race to the bottom. It's only short-lived. It's not a long-term play for business. So we're not the cheapest. We're not the most expensive, but the cost that we pass on to the client enables us to pay fairly with the specialists and fractional support that we utilize in the business. I'll make no odds, the margins are reasonable. It depends on the type of work you do. But of course, we're in it to make money. We're a business. I'm not going to ever disguise that. But we also want to make sure that we're remunerating fairly. And that is the only way we can keep hold of talent, aside from a lot of the other benefits of working with us. But ultimately, it always boils down to, okay, but what are you going to pay me for this work? So we're very clear on that.
And so I suppose the other thing that I was intrigued with, having been in retail, you have seen what a B2C go-to-market approach can be. You're in this interesting hybrid, I suppose, where you're B2B in terms of you're bringing a business service to business, but you're also what I call B2P. You're a business providing a service to professional. How do you balance those things, and how does that work from a brand and go-to-market approach?
It's a really good question, and it's one I completely underestimated coming into this particular acquisition and market. And I think one of the biggest challenges with any go-to-market strategy in this industry is you could say it's heavily saturated, but what isn't in recruitment? And my belief is, whilst we're not a recruiter, there is a slice of the pie for everyone. That's why we're here. I think there's a real need, and which is what we're trying to achieve, of just a confident, trustworthy brokerage or agency that you just feel are attracting the right talent based on how you're doing business and conducting business and how you feel as a brand. So you're attracting the right fractional support, but also clients that don't see you as a bit of a scammy, we're outsourcing to another country, but we're not telling you about. So I feel there's a real opportunity there to have a brand that is trusted in both of those spaces, because yes, we want to attract clients. Of course, we're a business, but we're not going to have clients if we can't attract fantastic support. So we are very much in the middle of trying to balance the way that we come across as a brand to do both of those things. But it is a challenge. I mean, the addressable market is huge. We're very industry agnostic, so there isn't really a decision maker or industry or company size that sticks out more than the others. So you can't just go, well, actually, we're doing a lot of work in health tech, let's double down on that industry. Never really the case. And then layering on top of that, the challenge of actually trying to get your positioning and messages and copy that actually explains in a very succinct way what you do, because we are very easily confused as a recruiter. We're not. We're very easily confused as a marketplace. We're not. But trying to get that on paper of we're a high touch solution for you sourcing fractional support for your business has been quite the challenge. And I don't think we've nailed it yet. You know, we're going through another iteration at the moment of how we kind of position ourselves in the market. Because when you're on a sales call and you explain it verbally like I've done, people are like, this is great. We like what you're doing. We need this. Trying to convey that before they hop on a call and they've read a bit more about you has been quite challenging. So yeah, the go-to-market strategy it's still ongoing. And it's been quite the learning curve over the last year for sure. So I don't think we've nailed it, and I think we've got a bit more of a journey ahead of us with that. But I think we're getting closer to where we want to kind of strike.
Yeah, and that's part of building a brand, isn't it? You're constantly improving, enhancing, and iterating, and you're tweaking towards the market needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm reflecting on this in two perspectives. So I'll ask the first question, which is, what do you believe makes a really ideal fractional for your services?
So there's three things that we really like that works really well. So we like individuals to have cut their teeth in corporate at some stage. I'm a big advocate of corporate still. I know there's a massive narrative out there of don't ever go into corporate, start the business, become a fractional, specialist or executive immediately. I disagree with that mantra entirely. I disagree with it for number one, learn people. If you can go into a role where you've led people and you've learnt leadership and you can really inspire and motivate but challenge people, the rest will just unlock afterwards. I think it's such a transferable skill, and I wouldn't be able to talk the way I talk or lead the way I lead had I not done those 9 years in corporate and leadership roles before. We like to have seen some corporate experience. The structure that you learn is important, and the L&D and the skills that you learn is also important in those structures. We then like an experience of startup and scale up world. The pace is entirely different. It's scrappy. There is no structure. So for people that have come from corporate into something that's so different like that, shows that they're able to adapt really easy. They're very agile as an individual. They can learn on their feet. They can problem solve. They're very, very quick at what they do. And then we like a blend of them having worked for themselves as a fractional support for a number of years as well. And the main point of why we focus on that last point is we like some longevity with, look, we don't necessarily want someone immediately that's come out of a corporate role and hasn't done anything else. And they're like, well, actually, I'm going to be a fractional support executive now, because a job might come up in 6 months that is their dream job. Salary is amazing, package is amazing, and they'll just go back into that then full-time employment role. So we have to be quite careful with longevity, because if we've paired with a client, 2 clients, 3 clients, and then all of a sudden after a month or 2 they leave, the quality of our service then starts to diminish and we've got inconsistency. So we like to hit all 3 of those criterias. And I think once we do, and we do consistently do that now, they are the best type of fractional support or executive that we find.
And that's really describing what you could only really is a very rounded individual, aside from their core expertise. But as somebody who's worked across the full breadth of what you've described, you actually bring the learnings and experience from all of those to cross-pollinate across with the organization you're working for. And I would even throw into the mix there potentially, what I don't know if you class it as enterprise, but also working with government state organizations, because that brings a whole different world into the universe in terms of that as a reference point, and government.
Maybe that could be a 4th criteria. I think people are gonna really dislike our process of sourcing. It's going to get longer and longer. But I think on that point as well,
there's one other dimension I think might be interesting, which is, have they had any active engagement with the charity sector? Because we can talk about what it feels like to engage with government and corporate and startup. Charities are really interesting because they're, the people who benefit don't pay you any money. The people who pay you money don't get any benefit. And the people who are in charge don't have any direct stake in the outcome. That's a whole new can of worms. But if somebody's navigating that, or been a trustee, or been involved in some other governance role in an educational institution or something like that, suddenly you've got a whole new perspective and a whole new flexibility. But hey, let's make the list longer and longer.
Noticed actually there is a few fractional executives or fractional specialists that are focusing more on the charity sector. That is their niche, where they're coming on board to provide support services. So I've seen more of that more recently, which is quite interesting. But I think on this whole process, like I hate the word vetting. That just doesn't feel humane at all in terms of talking about someone. And there's so much talk about, well, how do you vet, or what's our vetting process? And we had that on the site originally because we were kind of, following the copy of other businesses that do sort of what we do. We're removing it because it just doesn't feel right. Yes, we need to talk about how we find people, but I think you also need to be quite respectful of, they are people. They're not animals. We're not, I think there's a lot of terminologies in the space that just, they don't work.
Yeah. So what do you believe then, Chris, makes an ideal client for a fractional, for your fractional team?
In an ideal world, someone that has utilized that level of support before, which is quite rare to find, especially in startups and scale-ups where traditionally a lot of the business is. That is a real challenge for us, because quite often they haven't, number one, had the role that we're about to provide in a fractional way. They haven't used fractional before, and they could even be a 1st or 2nd time founder with very, very limited leadership experience or skill set. And I think we need to do a lot more work with them around, okay, this, whilst they're not an employee as such, they're a human being. They respond to feedback. You need to be very clear with feedback around, if something quite hasn't hit the mark, why hasn't it? And explain your expectations. We see that all the time, lost in translation, where people are just so bad at communicating to our fractional specialists that it's just completely lost in translation. And it's such a shame, because I think I'm very clear on, black and white communication. People respond to you way better when you're just open and honest. We see that missing all of the time. I think we've got a duty of doing better with the client work with us to manage their expectations. But clients that have utilized this model before, they understand that, if 70% of their business is FTE and 30% is fractional, they just get it. They like the model. It keeps them agile. They can move really quickly as a business if things are changing in the market or they need to evolve. Those are the perfect clients. Or they understand the benefit of an extension of their let's say, marketing team needs some additional support for 6 months. You can plug in, they get it, and then you can plug that back out again. But unfortunately, unfortunately, you don't always get the perfect client all of the time. So we have to work with what we've got. But I do think there's an onus on us to educate more.
That's really interesting to hear what's going on there. And I think for me, there's a tension between all of this flexibility and what I would call the real strength of a portfolio executive who becomes a part-time member of your team on a long-term basis. And I appreciate that there are all sorts of different gradations experience that can come in and provide support. But where I've seen the most power is where it is a long-term relationship where they are a part-time, they're treated as a part-time member of the team. And for the senior executives, that they are invited to the executive board meetings, that they are contributing to strategy so much more than just a gun for hire. And I suppose that brings me to the question is, how do you see a broker will support them, the executives, long term to build the portfolio of clients they aspire to? Because that's the kind of questions listeners are asking us. What advice do you have for them to ensure they engage effectively with your organization?
I think ultimately the fractional guys that we use, some have got a really clear idea of who they work best with because they've done it for a very long time and they know exactly the type of client they're immediately going to gel with based on the work that's required, but also the relationship or the personality of the client. Those that have not done it for so long, I think, can only learn that by the more client work they do, the type of businesses they work with, the different industries, and you start to get a real feel of, actually, I didn't really enjoy that type of work in that industry because for X reason, but I did enjoy this work when I did it for a Y reason. And I know that's where I really want to hedge my bets going forward. I think a lot of it is just through trial and error. The only way that we can support that is listen. So we are really, really keen on making sure that we're very close to availability of our fractional specialists because they have commitments outside of us with other clients and obviously life. We have a lot of, I would say, mothers that have been in some really interesting roles previously and have come out of those roles to have children, and now outside of having the kids, they now want something that's a bit more flexible for their lives, and we have to be very respectful of what that looks like. And also listen to them in terms of where do they want to work, who do they want to work with. And again, as I said earlier on in the conversation, that meet and greet culture fit call that we do is absolutely critical to that, because we need to make sure that we give everyone the right type of work for them. If we don't, it's just never going to work. The client gets a really poor service. Fractional specialist feels really demotivated and uninspired. And that is not a marriage for good work. So providing that we listen and we take action on what we're hearing, I think that's the most important thing that we can do.
It strikes me, Chris, that you have a lot of internal team cultural development that's really critical to the success of your business. And also that you probably have a certain level, particularly as you grow the business, of constant L&D and training yourself to make sure that everybody really understands how essential that is, how they communicate. And you're talking about aspects of iterating your brand. So even looking at that brand language instead of vetting, what is the expression we're all consistently using? How is it appearing in our emails and when we meet and greet and speak with both our clients and our fractionals? And that's probably something that's quite an essential part of the business then as well. So I've another question then. What advice would you give fractional executives as they seek to choose between using a broker and finding clients directly?
Don't put your eggs in the broker's basket. We always say that when we have any sourcing calls and sort of relevant kind of conversations with people that we're looking to bring on board, because what we don't want to do is overpromise and underdeliver. So spread your bets, find your own clients, because doing business development, even if you absolutely hate it, is a really worthwhile skill set that will enable you to then organically find out the type of clients and work that you want to do. Have a broker or two in the back end that can also feed you further work, which can add as a nice supplement to the time that you haven't fulfilled with clients outside of that. So having both models, I think, is always the best. I believe pretty much every single fractional specialist that works with us has a blend of both, and it works brilliantly because they can plug into us when they've got a few hours or days spare in the week, but they've also got their other client work that they can always depend on as well. Putting all your eggs in one basket just obviously doesn't de-risk you. So I think that's important. And then just find the right agency for you. You will get a feel immediately based on how you're sourced or how you're interviewed or vetted, based on what that culture is going to feel like as soon as you join. And always go with your gut on that. If it's telling you that it's feeling a little bit, and I'm not being treated like I'm outside of IR35, the likelihood is that will continue. And it could even be that the quality of client work you get is not great either, and you just won't feel supported. We obviously have a number of the team that have come from various different agencies previous to us. They still work with some of the different agencies on top of ours, and the experiences are very, very different. You know, typically completely underpaid, uncommunicated with, don't feel supported. The client work is really low quality, and there isn't that support mechanism behind to make sure that if anything does go wrong, they've got a fallback. So we try to address all of those issues working with us, and I don't think we're perfect, but we're definitely getting into a position where we're doing a good job of that, and people are, you know, naturally staying with us.
So let's just look forward, through this glass darkly, if you like, into 3 to 5 years. How do you see the broker's role evolving and changing in the coming years? Do you think that they will become, because I've seen a whole range of different models. So there are brokers who are providing a whole toolkit to their professionals and almost acting as a franchisor. There are others who have got a very thin offer, and they're just saying, look, we'll put you up on a website and we'll promote the website. Good luck to you. Where do you see the direction of travel?
I think we're in a really interesting time, specifically in the UK, for this market, because obviously, I don't know if I can speak politics or not, but I will. The Labour government are obviously making hiring quite challenging for businesses. You know, we've got the national insurance hikes on our way in less than a month now. If the employment law bill changes go through in 26, again, that's going to have another impact. I think that's really interesting for the fractional market. Businesses will want to be more cost effective. It could even push, and we're seeing this already actually before any of these changes were announced, but we're seeing a lot more talent coming into the fractional market as well now. And I think it will force businesses to look here. It will be a talent pool they can no longer overlook. Given the fact that it is expensive to hire, sometimes you don't even need to hire that role, and it keeps your business very agile. I think that's only going to be good for the next 1 to 3 years. The watch out, as I said earlier in the discussion, is how we develop this model with all of the technological advancements that are ongoing at the moment, specifically AI, and how we keep that in the forefront of our mind to make sure that this fractional model works brilliantly alongside it and it doesn't get completely overtaken to the point where AI will always be prioritized. And I don't think that will be the case, but it absolutely will have an impact. The role of the broker, it just needs to get better. It needs to be a support function for both sides, as I talk a lot about. That is not going to go away. I think the more talent that comes into the market will raise expectation of what they're looking for. I think a broker that can absolutely nail the balance between fractional specialist relationship and client relationship will be the ones that win. There is a lot of get rich quick scheme brokerages at the moment. They're popping up all over the place in terms of outsource support, global talent. I think it's a long-term play. Those that are really looking to establish their brand, looking to establish their position in the market and what they truly stand for as an agency, which I don't think many are doing a very good job of. And we're certainly on the path to doing that, will be the ones that will win over that 5-year period. I think as more models that come up as well, the marketplaces like Fiverr and Upwork, they're fantastic. It's completely unlocked the fractional workspace globally. But if you speak to a lot of clients or even actually fractional supports that are using those marketplaces, there is always a story of we've been burnt by them. We weren't able to kind of secure the fractional support we thought we had, and the work wasn't great, and when we had to waste all that time, money and energy to find someone else to replace that work. Or from the fractional support side, it was like, well, actually this client was horrendous, it was really, you know, not a great experience, but we didn't have a support net underneath us to protect us in any way. So I think more of those models are pushing people to perhaps consider more of the high touch work. But it's certainly a long-term play. There's lots of good ahead of us, but there's also lots of evolution to keep on top of things, as well as this type of model grows and evolves over time.
Back to you, Lorraine.
I think it's been a really fascinating conversation, both from a fractional and from a client company perspective. It's certainly expanded. You've certainly expanded on areas that I hadn't thought of to the degree at which and I think the way in which you're really ensuring an equal focus between both parties is, I can only see it as a success and win-win for everybody. So I think that's very compelling in terms of the safety net, both from a client perspective and a fractional perspective. And it's a very compelling part of your brand offering. So thank you so much for sharing where you're at, your journey with us. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you and learn more about what it is you do, your work, both in the business you're running and as somebody who understands and knows and is effectively has worked as a fractional yourself?
Yeah, I think that the best place to catch me is LinkedIn for sure. I talk a lot about the fractional space on LinkedIn, and outside of that, acquisitions, because that's my day job. I acquire businesses, and I guess it's sometimes quite an interesting transition for people to see someone that left, you know, the golden handcuffs of a corporate career at 30 and transition into the crazy world of working for themselves and 10 times multiplying the risk of life. But I think it's always exciting, and it's a good story to tell. And I'm always inspired by people that do it, but also inspired by people that are interested in doing it and wanting to make that jump. So yeah, always open to talk fractional and acquisitions and leaving corporate, but LinkedIn is definitely the best place to find me. And this has also been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed talking with you both. It's definitely very topical and needs to keep, we need to keep waving the flag for fractional on both ends of the spectrum. So it's been great for that.
So there's quite a lot of Chris West in the world. So just to help people find you quickly, if you type in Chris West Jampot, you'll find him straight away. Chris,
I'm the guy with the orange background with the really cheesy white smile. It's probably the easiest way to find me on. My teeth haven't been whitened. It was horrendous photograph. So yeah, you'll find me on there. That's probably the best thing. I can't believe there's so many Chris West. I thought it was quite obviously really common name. My parents obviously didn't really think that one through. But yeah, that's me. You'll find me on there with the orange background.
So have you any final thoughts or takeaways for our listeners about making the most of working with somebody with your expertise and services?
Value yourself, value the skill set you bring, value the work quality that you provide, and don't lose sight of that. Don't allow any business or organization to devalue you and get the bargain of a century. Know your worth and know that you will provide an exceptional service by joining that business for their clients, and you will not go far wrong. But just make sure that you choose the right partner that's going to provide you the work, because there are so many agencies in this space, and some are doing a fantastic job, but others less so. So finding that balance between supporting you as the fractional executive and the client is I would say the most important thing to find. And once you do that, it will be great for your fractional career.
Thank you. Well, that's it for today's episode of the Fractional Frontier. We hope you found the conversation insightful.
And be sure to follow us on LinkedIn for more exclusive content and catch the edited episode on all major platforms. And don't forget to subscribe. And if you enjoyed today's discussion, leave us a review or share the episode with your network. Thanks for exploring the fractional frontier with us, where leadership knows no boundaries.